It's a Monday morning and you are watching the World 24/7 on the NDTV network. We've got an action-packed bulletin lined up for you. Let's begin with the top stories you need to know. US President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin are expected to speak this week as the US tries to broker a ceasefire in the Russia-Ukraine war. National Security Advisor Ajit Doval held bilateral talks with US Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard and chaired a conclave of top global intelligence czars. India and New Zealand announced the relaunch of free trade agreement talks after a 10-year break. This as New Zealand Prime Minister Christopher Luxon kickstarts a 5-day visit in India. A night meant for celebration turned into a horrific tragedy in North Macedonia when a nightclub caught fire, leading to 59 deaths. Around 1,500 people were attending a concert inside that venue. In the United States, at least 37 people have died across Missouri, Arkansas, Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Alabama, and Mississippi as powerful storm systems swept through the Midwest and the South. The Vatican has released the first photo of Pope Francis at the chapel in Rome since his hospitalization on the 14th of February. Well, a big focus. US President Donald Trump and his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin are expected to speak this week. This is what Special Envoy Steve Witkoff has said, as Russia has yet to agree to a US brokered ceasefire proposal with Ukraine. In fact, Steve Witkoff has said that he believes a deal would be reached in the coming weeks. In other news, US Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard joined intelligence and security officials from about 20 countries for a conclave chaired by National Security Advisor Ajit Doval in Delhi. This actually makes her the first high-ranking official from the second Donald Trump administration to visit our country. But besides the US Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard, Canadian spy chief Daniel Rogers and Britain's MI6 boss Richard Moore are among the top global intelligence czars who've converged in India this last weekend. For further clarity, we have with us strategic affairs expert Brahma Chellaney on the broadcast. As always, sir, thank you so much for making time for us. Now, Tulsi Gabbard's trip to India, we know it's a part of a multi-nation tour, but how significant would you argue her visit is from a strategic affairs perspective?
It's very important in the bilateral context because she is a very important player in the Trump administration, and it's important both for the US and India to mend this relationship, which came under somewhat pressure during the Biden era. For the US, relations with India are very important, in fact critical, to balance China and the Indo-Pacific. Without a strong relationship with the rising India, the Trump administration cannot pursue its free and open Indo-Pacific strategy.
Indeed.
And for India, the relationship with the United States is critical to its economic and military security. Therefore, it's in the interest of both countries to mend that relationship, to ensure that the relationship regains its momentum, the momentum that we saw in the first term of the Trump administration.
Right.
The fact that the Trump is back in the White House is good news for the US-India relationship.
In fact, as I mentioned, this is the first high-level visit to India by a top official from the Trump administration, Trump 2.0. Some say Tulsi Gabbard's visit actually symbolizes the evolving nature of US and India intelligence cooperation. Do you agree, sir?
Well, the relations between the United States and India have seen significant ups and downs over the years. The intelligence sharing aspect of the relationship gained space, gained traction in the Trump first administration.
Yes.
Then we saw during the Biden presidency how the US played the Khalistan card against India quite openly. For example, when Prime Minister Modi went to the US to take part in the Quad Summit last September 2024, on the eve of his visit, the White House hosted a meeting with Khalistan militants where senior intelligence and administration officials briefed these militants. This was a clear message to India that the US will play the Khalistan card. And then we also saw during the Biden presidency, the State Department, especially the Secretary of State, Blinken, playing the human rights card against India. So given what we saw in the last 3 years in particular, building trust became difficult. And now that Tulsi Gabbard is in New Delhi, her visit is going to focus on 3 critical issues. One is counterterrorism, intelligence sharing, and third is cybersecurity. And to achieve close collaboration on all 3 fronts, it's very important for the 2 countries to rebuild trust.
Thank you so much, sir, for joining us with your views. As always, we will, of course, revert to you for the outcomes of this visit. But meanwhile, India and New Zealand have announced the relaunch of free trade agreement talks after a 10-year break. And the announcement of the talks comes as India has stated its aim to conclude trade negotiations with the United States and the European Union this year. This, as New Zealand Prime Minister Christopher Luxon arrived in New Delhi for a 5-day visit, which will last until the 20th of this month. He is scheduled to meet Prime Minister Modi today at Hyderabad House, where the leaders are expected to exchange MOUs. Well, with that, let's take you to North Macedonia, which has declared a 7-day period of mourning after a fire in a nightclub left at least 59 people dead and scores injured, as authorities have detained 15 people for questioning, and the Interior Minister said a preliminary inspection revealed that the club was operating without a proper license. But the fire ripped through the Pulse nightclub during a hip-hop concert. 1,500 people are said to have attended this concert, and only one member of the band that was performing is said to have survived and was being treated in hospital. This fire, as per preliminary reports, is thought to have been triggered by the use of special effects pyrotechnic devices. Well, in other news, authorities have discovered clothing believed to belong to missing University of Pittsburgh student Sudiksha Konanki on a lounge chair at the Dominican Republic beach, where she mysteriously vanished over a week ago. In fact, images obtained by CDN show a white netted sarong draped over a beach chair and also a pair of sand-covered beige flip-flops next to it. Investigators have stated that the clothing appeared undisturbed and matched the footage that you see on the left side of your screens. Staying with updates from the US, unusually vicious and damaging weather across multiple US states spawned violent tornadoes, blinding dust storms, and fast-moving wildfires this weekend, leaving at least 37 people dead. In fact, the dynamic storm that began on Friday earned an unusual high-risk designation from weather forecasters. Still, experts say it's not unusual to see such weather extremes in the month of March. But wind-driven wildfires caused extensive damage in Texas and Oklahoma, and officials have warned that parts of both states will actually again face an increased risk of fire danger this week as well. Switching tracks, Prime Minister Narendra Modi, in a podcast with Lex Friedman, has expressed deep admiration for Donald Trump, stressing the man has courage and makes his own decisions, and this at a time when the US president has imposed punitive tariffs on India. In fact, Prime Minister Modi also asserted that there was a concerted effort to create the perception that the 2002 riots were the biggest ever in Gujarat, which he says that was far from reality. Our Prime Minister also shred Pakistan in this podcast. Here are some snippets for you. Listen in.
आपकी अमेरिका की लाइफ में ये इम्पॉसिबल है कि हजारों की भीड़ में अमेरिकन राष्ट्रपति चल पड़े, एक पल का भी विलंब किए बिना तो मेरे साथ चल पड़े भीड़ में। अमेरिका की जो सुरक्षा तंत्र था पूरा एकदम से वो हो गया था, डिस्टर्ब हो गया था। मेरे लिए टच कर गया कि इस व्यक्ति में हिम्मत है, ये डिसीजन खुद लेते हैं। और दूसरा, मोदी पर उनको भरोसा है कि मोदी ले जा रहा है तो चलिए चलते हैं। और जब उन पर गोली चली अब इस चुनाव कैंपेन में, तो मुझे राष्ट्रपति ट्रंप एक ही नजर आए। उस स्टेडियम में मेरा हाथ पकड़ करके चलने वाले ट्रंप और गोली लगने के बाद भी अमेरिका के लिए जीना, अमेरिका के लिए ही जिंदगी, ये जो उनका रिफ्लेक्शन था, क्योंकि मैं नेशन फर्स्ट वाला हूं, वे अमेरिका फर्स्ट वाले हैं, मैं भारत फर्स्ट वाला हूं, तो हमारी जोड़ी बराबर जम जाती है। तो कहते हैं ये बहुत बड़े राइट वगैरह, तो ये भ्रम फैलाया गया है। अगर 2002 के पहले का डेटा देखें तो पता चलता है कि गुजरात में कितने दंगे होते थे। हमेशा कहीं ना कहीं कर्फ्यू लगा रहता था। पतंग के अंदर कम्युनल वायलेंस हो जाए, साइकिल टकरा जाने पर कम्युनल वायलेंस हो जाए। 2002 से पहले गुजरात में 250 से ज्यादा बड़े दंगे हुए थे, और 1969 में जो दंगे हुए थे वो तो करीब 6 महीना चले थे। और इतनी बड़ी घटना, एक ऐसा स्पार्किंग पॉइंट बन गया कि कुछ लोगों की हिंसा हो गई, लेकिन न्यायालय ने उसको बहुत डिटेल में देखा है, लंबे अरसे। और उस समय हमारे जो विरोध के लोग हैं वो सरकार में थे, और वो तो चाहते थे कि हम पर जितने आरोप लगे थे हमको सजा हो जाए, लेकिन उनके लाखों कोशिश के बाद भी जुडिशरी ने पूरी तरह डिटेल में उसका एनालिसिस किया, 2-2 बार किया, और पूरी तरह निर्दोष। जिन लोगों ने गुनाह किया था उनके लिए न्यायालय ने अपना काम किया है। उन्होंने अपना पाने के बाद उनको लगना चाहिए था कि चलो भाई हमें हमारा मिल गया, भारत का धन्यवाद करें, हम सुख से जिए। उसके बजाय उन्होंने लगातार भारत से संघर्ष का रास्ता चुना। अब प्रॉक्सी वॉर चल रहा है। अब ये कोई आइडियोलॉजी नहीं है, आइडियोलॉजी ऐसी थोड़ी होती है, लोगों को मारो काटो, टेररिस्टों को एक्सपोर्ट करने का काम चल रहा है। और सिर्फ हमारे साथ ही नहीं, अब दुनिया में कहीं पर भी टेररिस्ट की घटना घटती है तो कहीं न कहीं सूत्र पाकिस्तान जाकर के अटकते हैं। तो दुनिया पहचान गई है कि ये प्रकार से आतंकवादी प्रवृत्ति, आतंकवादी मानसिकता, और वो सिर्फ भारत ही नहीं, दुनिया भर के लिए परेशानी का केंद्र बन चुका है। और हम लगातार उनको कहते रहे हैं कि इस रास्ते से किसका भला होगा, आप आतंकवाद के रास्ते को छोड़ दीजिए, ये स्टेट स्पॉन्सर्ड टेररिज्म जो है वो बंद होना चाहिए।
And speaking of Pakistan, a devastating attack on a bus carrying paramilitary troops in Balochistan has resulted in the deaths of 5 soldiers and also injured over 30 people. This actually marks the second major attack on security forces in the region, and the Balochistan Liberation Army has claimed responsibility for this attack. Well, stopping for a quick break for now. Back in a moment. Do stay tuned. Welcome back. The United States has flown more than 200 immigrants, alleged members of a Venezuelan gang, to be imprisoned in El Salvador. This is what President Nayib Bukele has said after Donald Trump controversially invoked wartime legislation to expel them. In fact, the deportations took place despite a US federal judge granting a temporary suspension of the expulsions order, apparently as planes were already headed to El Salvador. For quick clarity, we have with us live from Washington, D.C., Daniel Block, who's a senior editor, Foreign Affairs, and a contributing editor at the Washington Monthly. Thanks so much, Daniel, as always, for making time for us. Now, we understand that these deportations took place despite a federal judge's order temporarily banning the expulsions?
That's correct. And it really gets to the heart in some ways of what makes this such an important moment in the Trump administration, where there's been this debate going on since he took office about whether he'll actually listen to the courts. So during Trump's first term, he took many steps that were deemed unconstitutional by judges, and he largely, and in fact, I think entirely respected those decisions. So when the courts told him, you can't do something, he stopped. They reversed the policy. There's been some speculation this time around that that won't be the case. And this is the first instance, I think, where it seems pretty clear cut, at least to me, that the judge said one thing and he did another. The judge said in his order, if the planes are in the air, turn them around, fly them back to the United States. And they didn't. And it's still a little unclear if the planes had actually landed in El Salvador, if the whole operation was completed before the judge's order came down. But the reporting so far suggests it wasn't.
Well, we'll have to wait and watch how this plays out. In fact, we understand that this wartime authority has only been invoked 3 times before. This was during the World War of 1812, and the World War was the first one and the second one. But Daniel, we'll of course revert you for regular updates. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, in other news, the new Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney is heading to Paris and London today to seek alliances as he deals with US President Donald Trump's attacks on Canada's sovereignty and economy. He will also meet with King Charles III, who's the head of state in Canada. My colleague Maha Siddiqui has been tracking the finer details. She joins us live from Vancouver at the moment. Maha, is the Trump factor the primary reason for Mark Carney's trip?
Well, absolutely. Just like Justin Trudeau ended his tenure by visiting Europe, Mark Carney starting his tenure by visiting Europe, meeting French President Emmanuel Macron, and then the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, as well as King Charles III. Now, the focus of this visit is going to be trade and security. As far as trade is concerned, the Canada-EU comprehensive economic and trade agreement will form the basis of the conversation. Apart from that, on the issue of security, we've also seen another critical decision, Mark Carney ordering that they should once again look at the deal that they had with Lockheed Martin for F-35s. 88 planes were being looked at by Canada, but now it's going to be reviewed whether they really need to only work with Lockheed Martin or they could work with other aviation sector companies. Now, this is the focus of the visit. Meanwhile, Carney has also said that he's not immediately looking at going to the US, but there are efforts underway for a conversation between Mark Carney and US President Donald Trump.
As always, Maha, thank you so much for joining us with the lowdown. And finally, NASA has confirmed Sunita Williams' Earth return, with curiosity building over the return of the pair of US astronauts that have been stuck for more than 9 months on the International Space Station. NASA has confirmed that Sunita Williams and Butch Wilmore will return to Earth on Tuesday. That's the 18th of March. Sunita Williams and Butch Wilmore will be transported home aboard a SpaceX Crew Dragon craft. Thanks so much for investing your time in watching this edition of The World 24/7. As always, we'll keep tracking the latest for you. Do stay tuned.